Good morning, friends, and welcome to the United Lodge of Theosophists. Today's talk is Karma and the Treading of the Path. And this quarter, there's been a lot of focus on karma. There's some quotes in our program about it. And we've had a number of talks talking about thought, the use of the powers of the mind, the function of attention, consciousness and unconsciousness in our actions. And this is all leading up to the subject of karma, or the idea that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. But just to review a little bit, to touch on some of the points from the previous, and then we'll head into treading the path, meaning maybe some of the practical aspects in our day-to-day life in which we could become more aware of karma and how we generate it. In past weeks, we've talked about all of existence, all of manifestation being a product of the one life. And that one life, all the actions of all beings are essentially, can be brought back to that one life. And that every action affects all beings, therefore, it affects, the action of each affects all, therefore every action can be seen as a sacrifice towards the whole. And in fact, the entire universe and all manifestation as a product is built upon the sacrifice of life to life. It's differentiated more and more as we get to the physical plane, but it's still the one life. And like light broken into rays through a prism, the entire universe can be seen as sacrifice. And that sacrifice is really rooted in compassion because it's the law of laws. So we talked about the karma yogin who discovers wisdom in action. He completely understands how his thought and action will affect himself and all other beings, and how that can be rooted in truth, or that which is ultimately true in reality, or that which is illusory, or Maya, that which will pass. So every time we have a thought or an action, we say it, well, we don't say, but it's sort of like it disappears. But it doesn't really disappear. It's energy, it's vibration, and it's transformed. And if we're to act on behalf of the whole and to consecrate each action, we can sort of give it a forward impulse by setting it free for the benefit of others. And that's how we reach sort of the heart of action and the heart of all beings. The student read an anonymous quote that was very apropos, and it said, "The longest journey you will ever take is the 18 inches from your head to your heart." So if we're trying to maintain a spiritual posture, a consecration of all our actions on behalf of all, this brings about the idea of what sort of actions are supportable by the universe, what sort of meanings, what sort of joy and hope we can infuse and is supportable by the universe because it's on behalf of all, or whether those actions are, for personal aggrandizement or possessions for just oneself, and that ultimately it may be supportable for a while, but not in the long term. So in terms of practical applications, what does it mean in our day-to-day life when we react with persons, with objects, with our possessions? For an individual to make good use of whatever he possesses, he must become self-consciously aware and assume responsibility for putting them to good use, for upholding, protecting, for whatever objects he possesses, acquires, or earns. So it's almost like one becomes a custodian because those objects are really just borrowed. They don't truly belong to one forever. They might be in a form in the material world for a period of time. But for us to think of them as truly ours is, based on an unreality. For an individual to be sort of a custodian implies that he's has a self-governing capacity, and he's aware of the unmet needs in other beings as well as in himself. And at the same time, he's capable of controlling and transmuting his tendencies towards fulfilling the needs of all beings. He is one who's committed to cultivating generous feelings and altruistic hopes for all others, while at the same time freeing himself from attitudes that are exploitative towards objects or towards relationships. So in this way, a person can become self-regulating, consistent, reliable, and sacrificial. But it must be done in a courageous and intelligent way. Because unless he's thinking and feeling altruistically, it becomes sort of tainted. And that's going to engender karma, which will react upon the person. So there's sort of like an etiquette to the heart, and Theosophy is called the heart doctrine. And someone who is sensitive to others, we might say that they have soul manners, or they can connect to people on the level of the heart. They're able to speak and act with purity and virtue. And anyone can do this by becoming attentive to every resource one has at one's disposal, both inner resources and outer resources. It's precisely because one can see one's abilities and possessions as belonging to all beings, to God, so to speak, to all the universe, to all of mankind, to all of future generations, that he becomes sort of, one could say, excited about using them to their maximum potential for all beings. So this is someone who may have gained some inward moral balance, detached, magnanimous, imaginative, and it's because he understands that the universe is infinite. He has an idea of the full plenitude of the universe, as well as, of the macrocosmic universe, as well as the microcosm of the objects, and the relationships immediately within his or her sphere. The nature itself is plentiful. It has the ability to fulfill, the needs of the beings it can support. It's only because human beings misappropriate things and are selfish that keeps in an imbalance and disrupts nature. It also speaks to the fact that man and the collection of mankind, because of our resourcefulness and our ability to work together towards unity, that there's an inexhaustible resourcefulness that is untapped. When one has a benevolent motive and one is able to sustain it, because it's on behalf of all, there's a quality of love and appreciation or loving kindness that enhances the action, its value for others, its moral and its practical value. Such a person may not possess much or have much to give, but this person knows where and how to use it to increase its potential for good 100-fold. It's like that story in the Bible where Jesus has the fish and the bread and is able to multiply it to feed the many. That's allegory to what we're speaking to here. So as an idea, an ideal, being thinking of oneself as a custodian or a trustee, what are the practical implications? What would we each have to do to make it more potent and more real in our lives? Well, of course it would be preceded by some sort of self-questioning, a period of thought and reflection upon oneself to strengthen our understanding, to inquire as to what we may be have a blind spot for, and if we're using our talents altruistically. The potential for a sort of radical change in our personal and impersonal relationships is possible once this sort of purification process is embarked upon. One would need a commitment to attention, to concentration, resolve to always use what one has in the best interests of others. So clarity, insight, unconditionality must be a part of that outlook and that concentration. Now, any ideal can't be immediately adopted. It has to be inculcated by degrees. So even if we can't do all that we want to do, just making the effort and having a positive attitude towards a new mode of application means that there will be a curve of growth, and it will increase in time, and it'll transcend any tendencies we have that may short circuit it. And this looks kind of simplistic, but there's two ways we can look at it. First of all, if one makes a concentrated effort to reduce the number of desires and habit patterns that sort of are underneath the ways we intend to be altruistic, or in the ways we use everyday objects, we can see, if we observe, that we can check our sort of expansive self-aggrandizement tendency of the lower mind, especially when it happens at the expense of others. And in this realm, it might be the work world, where it's competitive, or in academia, where there's one wants to make a name for oneself, or one feels that competition requires one to step on someone else to get to where one's going. So in one way, just reducing the sheer number of desires and habit patterns, but also to do it with courage and wisdom, with discrimination. We want to extract the pure gold from the crude ore that we're working with. We don't want just less possessive desires, but more benevolent ones on behalf of all. So desire has an energy to it, and we can purify that best perhaps through our imagination. And in previous weeks we talked about steps on how to do that. But willingly using the imagination to imagine for someone sees on the street or on the bus, or for a loved one, imagine what it might feel like for their needs to be fulfilled, for them to have all the resources they need at their disposal. How might that change the world